Myth 1. Fish grow to the size of their tank. Have you ever heard someone say that a fish will only grow as large as its tank allows? This idea is everywhere. Pet store employees repeat it. It shows up in online forums and it's used to justify keeping large fish in small aquariums. The logic seems almost intuitive. If you put a goldfish in a bowl, it stays small. Put it in a pond and it grows massive. Therefore, the tank size must control growth. But here's what's actually happening. When a fish is kept in a tank that's too small, it's not adapting to fit the space, suffering from stunted growth due to chronic stress and poor water quality. Think about it this way. You wouldn't expect a dog to stop growing because you keep it in a small cage. The dog might survive, but it would be unhealthy, stressed, and living far below its natural lifespan. Fish work exactly the same way. Their genetic blueprint determines their adult size, and that programming doesn't change based on their environment. The science behind this is straightforward. Fish produce growth-inhibiting hormones as a stress response. When they're confined to an adequate space, these hormones accumulate in the water, even with regular water changes, creating a chemical environment that suppresses growth. Add to this the poor water quality that naturally occurs in small volumes, and you have a recipe for stunted, unhealthy fish. The fish appears to have adapted to the tank size, but what's really happened is that chronic stress and toxin exposure have damaged its growth mechanisms. Research in aquaculture has demonstrated this repeatedly. When juvenile fish are raised in properly sized systems with excellent water quality, they reach their genetically predetermined size. The same fish raised in cramped conditions show reduced growth rates, skeletal deformities, weakened immune systems, and drastically shortened lifespans. Consider the common goldfish, that 25-cent carnival prize. In optimal conditions, common goldfish regularly reach 12 to 14 inches in length. Pond-kept specimens have been documented at 18 inches. Yet most goldfish kept in bowls or small tanks die within months at just 2 or 3 inches long. They didn't adapt to the bowl. They died before they could grow. The skeletal damage from stunted growth is often permanent. Even if you move a stunted fish to a larger tank, its bones have already developed incorrectly. Its organs have compressed into a body cavity that's too small. The damage compounds over time, the liver doesn't function properly. The kidneys struggle, and the fish becomes increasingly susceptible to disease. What makes this myth particularly insidious is that it gives people permission to keep fish in inappropriate conditions while believing they're doing nothing wrong. After all, if the fish was supposed to grow larger, it would have, right? This circular reasoning has led to decades of suffering for countless fish. The solution is simple but requires letting go of this myth entirely. Research the adult size of any fish you're considering. A common goldfish needs at least 30 gallons as a starting point, plus 10 gallons for each additional goldfish. A placo, often sold as a cute 3-inch algae eater, can grow to 2 feet long and needs hundreds of gallons as an adult. That Oscar in the pet store needs a 75-gallon tank minimum, and ideally more like 150 gallons. When someone tells you a fish will grow to fit its tank, what they're really telling you is that they don't understand or don't care about basic fish welfare. Your fish's genetics don't change, its needs don't shrink. Keeping a fish in a tank that's too small doesn't create a smaller fish. It creates a stressed, deformed, short-lived fish that never had a chance to be what it was meant to be. Myth 2. Goldfish have a 3-second memory. Here's a myth so pervasive it's become a punchline. When someone forgets something quickly, we say they have the memory of a goldfish. The implication is clear. Fish are mindless creatures, swimming around their bowls with no awareness of their world, unable to remember anything for more than a few seconds. It's convenient, really. If fish can't remember anything, maybe they don't notice they're trapped in a tiny space. Maybe they don't suffer. Except goldfish and fish in general have memories that last months or even years. The scientific evidence dismantling this myth is overwhelming. In studies dating back to the 1960s, researchers at the University of Michigan trained goldfish to avoid electric shocks by swimming away from specific areas of their tanks. The fish not only learned this behavior within days, but they remembered it and continued to avoid those areas weeks later. More recent research has pushed these timelines even further. One of the most compelling studies involved training goldfish to push a lever at a specific time of day to receive food. The fish learned the task quickly and, more impressively, remembered the correct timing for months. When researchers varied the conditions, moving objects in the room, changing light patterns, rotating the tank orientation, the goldfish adapted their spatial navigation strategies, demonstrating not just memory but complex problem-solving abilities. Dr. Coulomb Brown at Macquarie University has spent decades studying fish cognition. His research shows that goldfish can recognize individual human faces, remember feeding schedules for months, and even learn to navigate complex mazes, when goldfish are given the choice between a familiar environment and a new one. They show clear preferences based on past experiences. They remember which areas provided food, where they felt safe, and which locations to avoid. The myth likely persists for several reasons. First, fish kept in barren bowls with nothing to interact with naturally appear less intelligent. Put yourself in their position. If you lived in an empty room with nothing to do and nowhere to go, you'd probably seem pretty vacant too. Second, the myth serves as psychological justification for poor fish-keeping practices. It's easier to keep a fish in inadequate conditions if you convince yourself the fish won't remember from one moment to the next. But here's where it gets interesting. Recent studies using high-tech brain imaging have shown that when goldfish are exposed to a painful or stressful stimulus, their brains show activity in regions analogous to the mammalian hippocampus, the area responsible for forming memories and spatial navigation. The fish brain might be structured differently from ours, but it performs remarkably similar functions. The part of the brain goldfish use for memory is called the pallium. While it's not identical to the hippocampus found in mammals, it serves the same purpose, encoding experiences into long-term memory. Damage to this region impairs a goldfish's ability to navigate and remember, just as damage to the hippocampus impairs memory in humans. The biological mechanisms are different, but the functional outcome is the same. What's particularly fascinating is that goldfish demonstrate what's called social learning. If one goldfish watches another goldfish figure out how to access food in a puzzle, the observer can learn from watching and solve the puzzle faster on their first attempt. This requires memory of what they observed, mental representation of the solution, and the ability to apply that knowledge later. That's not something a creature with a 3-second memory could accomplish. In aquaculture facilities where goldfish are bred and raised, the fish learn to recognize their feeders and come to expect food at specific times. They distinguish between people who feed them and people who don't. They remember which areas of their ponds are safe from predators and which locations have better food sources. These aren't simple reflexes. They're learned behaviors that require memory retention over extended periods. The 3-second memory myth has real-world consequences. It's led to the widespread acceptance of bowl keeping, the belief that fish don't need environmental enrichment, and the general dismissal of fish welfare as a serious concern. When Adelaide Sebo, a behavioral ecologist at Oxford, examined this issue, she pointed out that the myth conveniently allows people to keep fish in conditions that would be considered criminal abuse for any other pet. You can't abuse something that doesn't remember, right? Your goldfish remembers the layout of its tank. It remembers where it gets fed. It remembers you. And yes, it remembers that tiny bowl it lived in before you upgraded to a proper aquarium. The next time someone makes a joke about goldfish memory, you can tell them this. Those fish remember a lot more than the person who's still repeating a myth that was debunked more than 50 years ago. Myth 3. Bettas can live in tiny bowls or vases. Walk through any pet store and you'll see them rows of tiny cups, each containing a single betta fish in barely enough water to cover its body. Next to these displays, you'll find decorative vases marketed as betta habitats. The message is clear. Bettas are easy, low-maintenance fish that thrive in small spaces. They're perfect for your desk, your nightstand, or anywhere you want a splash of color without the hassle of a real aquarium. This might be the single most harmful myth in the aquarium hobby, responsible for the deaths of millions of bettas every year. The myth stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of where bettas come from and how they live in the wild. Yes, bettas are found in rice paddies and shallow streams in Southeast Asia. Yes. During dry seasons, they sometimes end up in small pools of water. But here's what the myth leaves out. Those shallow pools can still span several square meters of surface area. They contain plants, insects, and complex microhabitats. And most importantly, they're temporary survival situations, not a betta's preferred habitat. Think of it this way. If you were stranded in your car during a snowstorm, you could survive there for days or even weeks. But would anyone argue that living in a car is ideal for humans because we can survive there temporarily? That's essentially what we're doing to bettas when we keep them in cups and vases. A groundbreaking study published in December 2023 by Professor Coughlan-Brown's team at Macquarie University provides hard scientific evidence for what many aquarists have known for years. The researchers observed male betta fish in 5 different housing conditions, ranging from tiny 1.5-liter jars to 19.3-liter aquariums with plants and hiding spots. The results were striking and unambiguous. Bettas kept in larger tanks were significantly more active. On average, they swam 92 seconds more during observation periods compared to fish in jars, a massive difference that represents nearly double the activity level. They displayed natural behaviors like foraging, exploring, and interacting with their environment. Fish in the enriched tanks spent nearly half their resting time using plants and hiding spots rather than just hovering in open water. In contrast, bettas confined to small jars exhibited abnormal behaviors that are recognized across animal welfare science as signs of psychological distress. They engaged in repetitive, stereotypic swimming patterns similar to the pacing seen in zoo animals kept in inadequate enclosures. They hovered motionlessly for extended periods, not because they were resting, but because they had literally nothing to do and nowhere to go. They showed excessive interaction with tank walls, repeatedly swimming into the glass as if seeking an escape that doesn't exist. The physiological requirements make small containers even more problematic. Bettas are tropical fish from Thailand and Cambodia, where water temperatures regularly reach 78 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. At room temperature, typically 68 to 72 degrees, bettas become lethargic. Their metabolism slows and their immune systems weaken. They're essentially in a state of constant cold stress. But adding a heater to a cup or small vase is either impossible or reduces the swimming space to almost nothing. Then there's the water quality issue. In a properly sized aquarium with filtration, beneficial bacteria establish colonies that process fish waste through the nitrogen cycle, converting toxic ammonia into less harmful compounds. In a small, unfiltered container, this process can't establish properly. Ammonia builds up rapidly. Without frequent water changes, we're talking daily or every other day, the water becomes toxic. And each water change, while necessary, is stressful for the fish as water parameters fluctuate wildly. The marketing around betta vases with plants adds another dangerous layer to this myth. Some products are sold as aquaponics systems, claiming the plant roots provide food for the betta while the betta's waste feeds the plant, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem that needs no maintenance. This is completely false. Bettas are carnivores. They eat insects and insect larvae in the wild. They cannot survive on plant roots. Meanwhile, a single plant can't possibly process all the waste produced by a fish. What you end up with is a starving betta in increasingly toxic water and a plant struggling in those same conditions. The research on proper betta care is clear. The absolute minimum tank size for a betta is 5 gallons, and 10 gallons is significantly better. The tank needs a heater to maintain tropical temperatures. It needs a filter, though one with adjustable flow since bettas have delicate fins that can be damaged by strong currents. It needs hiding places and plants, live or artificial, to provide security and enrichment. Without these elements, you don't have a proper betta habitat. You have a pretty prison. What makes this myth so persistent is the combination of convenience and cognitive dissonance. Cup-kept bettas in stores are displayed as if this is normal. People want to believe it's normal because the alternative, setting up a proper aquarium, requires more space, more money, and more effort. And bettas do survive in cups for weeks or months, which seems to validate the practice. But surviving is not the same as thriving. A betta in a cup is existing, not living. Individual bettas also show distinct personalities. Some are more active explorers. Others prefer to rest near plants. Some build elaborate bubble nests, while others rarely do. But none of them prefer to live in a space where they can barely turn around. None of them benefit from cold water and toxic waste accumulation. And none of them deserve to spend their lives in conditions that cause chronic stress and abnormal behavior. The European Union has moved toward regulating this. Germany banned fish bowls years ago. In January 2022, one of France's largest aquarium retailers announced they would stop selling traditional round fish bowls, stating explicitly that keeping fish in such containers drives them mad and kills them quickly. The retailer's CEO noted they could no longer in good conscience provide customers with products designed to house fish in cruel conditions. If you currently have a betta in a cup or small bowl, you already know something feels wrong about it. That instinct is correct. Your betta needs more space, warmer water, filtration, and enrichment. And here's the thing, a proper betta tank is one of the most rewarding setups in the aquarium hobby. When bettas have the space and conditions they need, they develop vibrant colors, build elaborate bubble nests, interact with their environment, and even seem to recognize their owners. They're intelligent, complex fish with distinct personalities. The myth that bettas can live in tiny containers isn't just wrong. It's a form of normalized animal cruelty that persists because we've decided to believe it. Your betta deserves better. They all do. Myth 4. You need to do 50% water changes every week for decades. The aquarium hobby has operated on a simple rule. Change 50% of your water every week. It's repeated in fish care guides, echoed in forums, and recommended by pet store employees. It's become such dogma that questioning it feels almost heretical. But what if this widely accepted practice isn't based on science at all? What if, for most aquariums, it's unnecessary? The 50% weekly water change rule is a fascinating case study in how myths become entrenched. Like many aquarium practices, it likely started as overcautious advice designed to prevent problems. If a little is good, more must be better, right? Weekly water changes ensure nitrates stay low. They replenish minerals. They remove accumulated waste and hormones. This all sounds logical. But when you examine the actual science and mathematics behind it, the picture becomes considerably more nuanced. Let's start with what water changes actually accomplish. In an established aquarium, the primary concern is nitrate accumulation, the final product of the nitrogen cycle. Ammonia from fish waste is converted by beneficial bacteria into nitrite, which is then converted into nitrate. Unlike ammonia and nitrite, which are immediately toxic at low levels, nitrate is relatively harmless to most fish species until concentrations become quite high. The question becomes, how high is too high? Social media and many care guides suggest keeping nitrates below 10 or 20 parts per million. Some sources claim you need to stay under 40. But research on fish tolerance to nitrates tells a different story. Most freshwater fish species show no adverse effects at nitrate levels of 80 parts per million. Some studies indicate levels up to 160 parts per million cause no measurable harm to adult fish. Only when concentrations exceed 200 parts per million do you start seeing significant health impacts in many species. This matters because the math changes dramatically based on these numbers. If your tank produces 10 parts per million of nitrate per week, and you're aiming to keep nitrates below 20, you'd need weekly 50% water changes. But if you're actually fine up to 80 parts per million, suddenly that same tank only needs a water change every 6 to 8 weeks. The bioload determines the schedule, not an arbitrary weekly ritual. There's a counterintuitive aspect to this that confuses many people. Larger, more frequent water changes can actually make your aquarium less stable, not more stable. Every time you change water, you're altering temperature, pH, mineral content, and dozens of other parameters. In a well-established tank, these parameters have settled into an equilibrium. A 50% water change disrupts that equilibrium significantly. Fish, like all animals, thrive on stability. Gradual changes they can adapt to. Sudden changes stress them. If your source water differs significantly from your tank water in pH or hardness, a large water change subjects your fish to rapid parameter swings. This is why you sometimes see fish become stressed or ill after a water change, even though the new water is technically cleaner. The change itself is the stressor. Now, this doesn't mean water changes are unnecessary. They absolutely serve important functions. They remove dissolved organic compounds that testing can't measure. They replenish trace minerals that fish and plants utilize. They dilute any growth-inhibiting hormones that may accumulate. And yes, they manage nitrate levels. But the question isn't whether to do water changes, it's how much and how often. The answer depends entirely on your specific aquarium. A heavily stocked tank with large, waste-producing fish needs more frequent water changes than a lightly stocked planted tank where plants consume nitrates as fast as they're produced. A tank with minimal filtration needs more attention than one with robust biological filtration and heavy plant growth. A Tanglein tank with 6 adult goldfish, which is overstocked and problematic for other reasons, might legitimately need 50% changes twice weekly. Meanwhile, a 40-gallon planted tank with a handful of small tetras might only need 20% changes monthly. The real key is testing. Test your nitrate levels weekly for the first month or two when you set up a new system. Watch how quickly they climb. That tells you your tank's bioload and informs your water change schedule. Once you understand your system's behavior, you can establish a routine that keeps nitrates in an acceptable range without unnecessary intervention. There's also the heavily planted tank exception. In aquariums with significant plant mass, especially fast-growing stem plants, nitrates may never accumulate to concerning levels. The plants consume nitrates as fast as the fish produce them. Some advanced planted tank enthusiasts have systems that have gone years without water changes, relying solely on topping off evaporated water. These systems work, but they require careful monitoring and are not suitable for beginners or tanks without substantial plant growth. The myth of mandatory weekly 50% changes has created an interesting economic situation. If every aquarium owner follows this advice, the annual market for water conditioners in the United States alone is estimated at around $150 million. That's a lot of product sales resting on advice that may not be scientifically necessary for many tanks. What's particularly frustrating about this myth is how it discourages people from the hobby. New aquarists set up a tank, try to maintain weekly 50% changes, find it exhausting or time-consuming, feel guilty when they fall behind, and eventually give up. If they'd known they could test their water and adjust the schedule based on actual need rather than dogma, they might have found the hobby sustainable. The best practice moving forward is this: understand your tank's specific needs through testing. For most moderately stocked aquariums, 25 to 30% water changes every 2 to 4 weeks. Maintain excellent water quality. Heavily stocked systems may need more frequent attention. Planted tanks may need less. Let your nitrate levels guide you, aiming to keep them below 80 parts per million for most species, with changes when they approach that threshold. Water changes are important, let's be clear about that. But like so much in fish keeping, one-size-fits-all advice often creates more problems than it solves. Your tank isn't your neighbor's tank. Your bioload, filtration, and plant density create unique conditions. Test, observe, and adjust. It's real fish keeping, not blind adherence to a rule that may have never made sense in the first place. Myth 5. Fish don't feel pain. This myth might be the most philosophically complex and emotionally charged on our list. The idea that fish don't feel pain has been used for decades to justify everything from commercial fishing practices to casual aquarium neglect. It's comforting to believe. Fish don't feel pain. We don't need to worry as much about how we treat them. The problem is, the scientific evidence increasingly suggests this belief is wrong. The debate centers on the distinction between nociception and pain. Nociception is the detection of potentially harmful stimuli, a biological alarm system. Even plants exhibit nociception in some forms. Pain, however, is the conscious experience of suffering that accompanies nociception. It's not just detecting damage, it's feeling distress about that damage. This distinction is why the fish pain debate has remained contentious. For years, scientists argued that fish couldn't experience true pain because they lacked the neocortex, the region of the mammalian brain associated with conscious experience. By this logic, fish might detect harmful stimuli through nociception, but they wouldn't consciously suffer from it. They'd simply react with reflexes, like pulling your hand away from a hot stove before you even realize it's hot. But recent research has systematically dismantled this argument. In 2003, Dr. Lynn Snedden's team identified nociceptors in rainbow trout, specialized nerve endings that respond to tissue damage. These receptors responded to mechanical pressure, high temperatures, and acidic chemicals, exactly like nociceptors in mammals. More importantly, they found that fish don't just reflexively respond to these stimuli. They show complex, sustained behavioral changes that suggest something more than simple reflexes. Here's where it gets compelling. When Snedden's team injected rainbow trout with dilute acetic acid in the lips, it's creating a painful but not permanently harmful stimulus. The fish displayed what can only be described as distress behaviors. They rocked back and forth, rubbed their lips against the gravel and tank walls, and took significantly longer to resume normal feeding behavior. These behaviors lasted hours, well beyond any simple reflex response. When the researchers administered morphine before the injection, these pain-indicating behaviors were dramatically reduced. The morphine study is particularly significant. Fish possess opioid receptors in their brains and spinal cords, the same receptors that painkillers target in humans. When given analgesics, fish show reduced pain responses. This suggests their nervous systems process noxious stimuli in ways that are functionally similar to mammalian pain processing, even if the underlying brain structures differ. More recent experiments have examined whether fish make trade-offs involving pain, a key indicator of conscious experience rather than reflexive response. In one study, zebrafish were given a choice between two chambers, one enriched with plants and hiding spots that they naturally preferred, and one bare and brightly lit that they normally avoided. When injected with acetic acid, the fish initially stayed in their preferred chamber. But when researchers dissolved pain relief medication in the less preferred chamber, the fish changed their behavior. They voluntarily moved to the chamber they normally avoided to access the pain relief. Think about what this means. The fish evaluated their options, recognized that one location provided relief from discomfort, and made a decision to accept a less ideal environment to reduce pain. That requires conscious awareness that you're in pain, understanding that one location provides relief, and making a choice. A simple reflex can't account for this complexity. Brain imaging studies have added another layer of evidence. When fish experience painful stimulation, their brains show increased activity in regions analogous to the human forebrain and midbrain areas involved in processing pain in mammals. This activity differs from responses to neutral stimuli, indicating that fish brains distinguish between harmful and harmless sensory input and process them differently. Gene expression studies have shown that painful stimulation triggers different molecular responses in fish brains compared to non-painful stimuli. The forebrain, the area some scientists claimed couldn't process pain, shows the most significant changes. This suggests the fish brain, despite its different structure, uses similar molecular mechanisms to process painful experiences. The evidence keeps accumulating. Fish with injuries show what's called guarding behavior. They protect the injured area. They show reduced activity and appetite, consistent with how animals in pain behave. They learn to avoid situations where they've experienced pain, showing memory and association that goes beyond simple conditioning. Some species even show elevated stress hormones and physiological changes that persist long after the initial injury. Critics of fish pain research argue that we're anthropomorphizing, projecting human experiences onto animals that might process stimuli completely differently. But this criticism cuts both ways. We also can't assume fish don't experience pain just because their brains are structured differently from ours. Birds don't have a neocortex either, yet extensive research confirms they experience pain. The question shouldn't be whether fish brains match mammalian anatomy, but whether they perform similar functions. There's also a practical welfare angle here. There's a reasonable possibility that fish experience pain, and the evidence increasingly suggests they do. Shouldn't we err on the side of caution? The precautionary principle in animal welfare suggests that when we're uncertain about an animal's capacity to suffer, we should treat them as if they can suffer until proven otherwise. This has real implications for aquarium keeping. It means that stress from poor water conditions isn't just about health markers. Fish might actually feel discomfort. Injuries from sharp decorations or aggressive tank mates aren't just cosmetic problems. They might cause genuine suffering. Keeping fish in tanks too small to exhibit natural behaviors isn't just limiting their movement, it might be causing psychological distress. The European Union has already moved on this issue. In 2010, they extended animal welfare regulations to include all cephalopods in scientific research, acknowledging their capacity for pain. Fish as vertebrates were already covered in many countries' animal welfare laws. But enforcement and standards for fish welfare have historically lagged behind those for mammals and birds. Understanding that fish likely feel pain doesn't mean we can never keep them in aquariums or fish for food. But it does mean we have an ethical obligation to minimize suffering. Aquariums should be properly sized and maintained. Euthanasia, when necessary, should be done humanely. Fish shouldn't be subjected to stressful conditions unnecessarily. The bottom line is this. Decades of research have produced a substantial body of evidence suggesting fish have the neural architecture, behavioral responses, and cognitive abilities consistent with pain perception. They possess nociceptors. They show prolonged behavioral changes in response to painful stimuli. They respond to analgesics. They make trade-offs to avoid or reduce pain. Our brains show activity patterns consistent with pain processing. The burden of proof has shifted. The question is no longer, can you prove fish feel pain? Why would we assume they don't? Your fish might not experience pain exactly as you do. But the evidence increasingly suggests they experience something that serves the same function, an aversive signal that modifies behavior and creates suffering. And that matters for how we choose to care for them. Myth 6. The nitrogen cycle is too complicated for beginners to understand. Here's a myth that keeps people from entering the hobby altogether. Browse online forums and you'll see countless threads from prospective fish keepers who are intimidated by dire warnings about the nitrogen cycle. You'll need to understand complex chemistry. You'll need to test constantly. One mistake and all your fish will die. It's presented as this mystical, fragile system that only experienced aquarists can master. The truth is, the nitrogen cycle is one of the simplest biological processes you'll encounter in fish keeping. Understanding it at a basic level takes about 5 minutes. Managing it takes patience, but not expertise. And the best part? Once it's established, it largely takes care of itself. Here's the entirety of what beginners actually need to know. Fish produce ammonia as waste. Ammonia is toxic. Fortunately, beneficial bacteria naturally colonize your aquarium and filter. These bacteria convert ammonia into nitrite. Nitrite is also toxic, but different bacteria convert nitrite into nitrite. Nitrate is far less toxic and accumulates slowly. You remove nitrate through water changes and plant uptake. That's it. That's the cycle. The process is called nitrification, and it happens everywhere in nature, in soil, in streams, in the ocean. Your aquarium isn't special or delicate. You're simply setting up conditions for bacteria that are already present in the water to multiply and establish colonies. These bacteria aren't temperamental. They're not hard to cultivate. Given time, food in the form of ammonia and oxygen, they'll establish themselves automatically. The myth of complexity comes from two sources. First, there's a contingent of aquarists who enjoy feeling like experts, and maintaining an aura of specialized knowledge serves that purpose. Second, there's a kernel of legitimate concern buried under layers of overblown warnings. Yes, during the initial cycling period, usually 4 to 6 weeks, ammonia and nitrite can reach levels that would harm fish. This is why fishless cycling exists and why adding too many fish too quickly to a new tank is problematic. But here's what the myth gets wrong. The cycle doesn't require constant monitoring once established. It doesn't collapse if you miss a water change. It's not mysteriously disrupted by minor changes. The bacteria are remarkably resilient. They can handle reasonable fluctuations in temperature, pH, and flow. They multiply to match the bioload, meaning they automatically adjust to the amount of waste your fish produce. New tank syndrome, the phenomenon where fish die in newly set up aquariums, happens because people don't understand the timeline, not because the cycle is complicated. If you add fish immediately to a brand new tank, there aren't enough bacteria yet to process their waste. Ammonia climbs to toxic levels within days. The solution isn't to master complex chemistry. It's to wait, let the bacterial colonies establish before adding fish. Or add fish very gradually so bacteria populations can grow in pace with increasing waste production. The fishless cycling method is straightforward. Add an ammonia source to your empty, running tank. This could be pure ammonia from a bottle, or even fish food that will break down into ammonia. Test the water every few days. When ammonia-eating bacteria establish, you'll see ammonia drop and nitrite rise. When nitrite-eating bacteria establish, you'll see nitrite drop and nitrate rise. Once ammonia and nitrite both read 0 within 24 hours of adding your ammonia source, your tank is cycled. Add fish gradually, and the established bacteria will handle their waste. Some people use bottled bacteria products to jumpstart the cycle, adding concentrated cultures of the specific nitrifying bacteria. These products have become more reliable over the years. They don't make the cycle instant, but they can reduce the time from 6 weeks to 2 or 3. Whether to use them is personal preference. The cycle will establish naturally either way. Here's where the myth does actual damage. When people believe the nitrogen cycle is complicated, they either avoid fish keeping entirely or they skip learning about it altogether. The second group ends up doing fission cycling, unintentionally adding fish to uncycled tanks, and then dealing with the consequences. They see fish gasping at the surface, fish dying inexplicably, and they often give up on the hobby, believing fish are just impossible to keep alive. The reality is so much simpler. Set up your tank. Let it run for 4 to 6 weeks while beneficial bacteria establish. Test occasionally to confirm the cycle is progressing. Once complete, add a few fish. Wait a week or two. Add a few more. The bacterial colonies grow to match your expanding bioload. After a few months, you have a stable system that requires minimal intervention. There's also a common misconception that you need to understand the chemistry to cycle a tank. People get bogged down in the difference between nitrosomonas and nitrobacter, or worry about optimal pH ranges for nitrifying bacteria, or stress about temperature's effect on bacterial growth rates. None of this is necessary for successful fish keeping. Understanding that ammonia converts to nitrate is sufficient. Everything else is interesting, but not required. The bacteria themselves are everywhere. They're in tap water, in the air, on surfaces. They don't need to be specially introduced in most cases. They'll find their tank on their own. What they need is time to multiply. A single bacterium divides into 2. Those 2 divide into 4. After enough generations, you have billions of bacteria capable of processing substantial amounts of waste. This takes weeks, not days. That's not complicated. It's just biology operating on its own timeline. What confuses people are the numbers. Ammonia measured in parts per million, nitrite in milligrams per liter, conversion rates, toxic thresholds, it all sounds technical. But here's the practical reality. Ammonia and nitrite should be zero in an established tank. Nitrate should be below 80 parts per million for most fish, though higher levels are often tolerated. If ammonia or nitrite aren't zero, either your tank isn't fully cycled or your bioload exceeds your biological filtration capacity. If nitrate climbs too high, do a water change. That's the extent of the chemistry you need. The myth that the nitrogen cycle is complicated has created an entire industry of products claiming to make it easier or bypass it entirely. Bottles of beneficial bacteria, special filter media, water conditioners that claim to neutralize ammonia. Many of these products are solving a problem that doesn't exist. The cycle isn't hard to begin with. What you need is patience and basic understanding, not expensive solutions to manufactured complexity. For someone truly new to the hobby, the advice is simple. Set up your tank with a filter and heater. Add an ammonia source if you're doing fishless cycling, or a small number of hardy fish if you're doing fish and cycling carefully with frequent testing and water changes. Wait, test your water initially to confirm the cycle is progressing, but don't obsess over daily measurements. After 4 to 6 weeks, you'll have a stable, cycled tank ready for its full stock. The nitrogen cycle isn't the hard part of fish keeping. It's choosing compatible species, managing aggression, diagnosing diseases. Maintaining stable parameters over years, these present more genuine challenges. But the cycle itself, it's automatic biology. Bacteria do what bacteria have evolved to do, which is process nitrogenous waste. Your job is simply to give them time and not interfere with the process. If you've been avoiding fish keeping because the nitrogen cycle seems daunting, you can stop worrying. It's not a mystery. It's not fragile. Then once you understand the basic concept, you'll wonder why it's presented as such a barrier to entry. The hobby has lost countless potential aquarists to this myth. Don't let it keep you from discovering a fascinating and rewarding pastime. Myth 7. Algae is a problem that must be eliminated. You set up your beautiful new aquarium. Everything looks pristine. Then, after a few weeks, you notice a green tinge on the glass, brown patches on your decorations, maybe some hair-like strands on your plants. Your first instinct is probably panic. You've got an algae problem. You need to fix this immediately. Clean everything. Buy algae-eating fish, dose chemicals. Get it under control before it ruins your tank. What if we told you that algae isn't your enemy at all? What if, in most cases, some algae is actually a sign of a healthy aquarium? This myth has created an entire subset of the aquarium industry dedicated to algae eradication. Special scrubbers, chemical treatments, UV sterilizers, algae-eating fish sold specifically to solve a problem that often isn't really a problem. The reality is that algae is a natural, normal, and even beneficial component of aquatic ecosystems. The question shouldn't be how to eliminate it, but how to keep it in balance. Let's start with what algae actually is. It's not a single organism, but thousands of different species of photosynthetic organisms, ranging from single-cell diatoms to multicellular filamentous forms. In natural aquatic environments, algae forms the base of the food chain. It oxygenates water. It provides food for invertebrates and fish fry. It competes with more problematic organisms like cyanobacteria. A completely algae-free aquarium is actually less diverse and less stable than one with some algae present. The hobby's obsession with algae elimination stems from aesthetics. We want our tanks to look like magazine photos, crystal clear water, spotless glass, pristine plants. But natural aquatic environments don't look like that. Visit any healthy pond, stream, or lake and you'll see algae. It's ubiquitous in nature because it's doing important work in the ecosystem. Here's what's actually happening when algae appears in your tank. This means light, nutrients, and appropriate conditions exist for photosynthetic growth. That's it. Algae is opportunistic. If there's available light and nutrients, particularly nitrates and phosphates, algae will grow. It's not an infestation or a disease. It's a plant-like organism filling an available niche. The amount and type of algae growth does signal your tank's nutrient balance. Excessive algae, the kind that coats every surface and clouds your water, typically indicates an imbalance. Maybe you're overfeeding and excess nutrients are building up. Maybe your lighting is on too long. Maybe you don't have enough fast-growing plants to compete with the algae for nutrients. But moderate algae growth on glass and decorations. That's completely normal and even desirable. Different types of algae indicate different conditions. Brown diatom algae often appears in new tanks during the initial cycle. It's temporary and will usually resolve on its own as the tank matures. Green spot algae tends to appear in tanks with low phosphates or CO2, indicating your plants might be nutrient limited. Green water, a free-floating algae that turns your water green, usually means excess nutrients combined with strong lighting. Hair algae suggests an imbalance in the ratio of nitrates to phosphates. But here's the crucial point. None of these are emergencies. They're information. They tell you about your tank's conditions. The solution isn't to panic and try to nuke every trace of algae. It's to adjust the underlying conditions that allow excessive growth. The algae eater myth deserves special attention. Pet stores frequently recommend plecos, Chinese algae eaters, or other fish as living vacuum cleaners for your tank. The promise is that these fish will eat the algae and keep your tank clean. While some fish do eat certain types of algae, this approach has several problems. First, most algae-eating fish only eat specific types of algae, and usually only when they're young and small. That cute little tinge pleco at the store. It's going to grow to 12 inches or larger and will stop eating much algae as it matures. The common pleco needs a massive tank and produces enormous amounts of waste, far more than any algae it might consume. Second, relying on fish to control algae doesn't address why the algae is growing excessively in the first place. If conditions favor algae growth, controlling it with fish is treating symptoms, not causes. The algae will continue to grow, and you've now added another fish that needs care and produces waste. Third, adding fish solely as utility animals rather than as species you want to keep is poor aquarium management. Every fish should be in your tank because you want that species. It's compatible with your other fish and you can meet its needs. Not because you're hoping it will solve a problem for you. The chemical and UV approaches are similar. You can dose algicides that kill algae, but they don't fix the conditions allowing growth. The algae will return. Meanwhile, you've potentially harmed your beneficial bacteria and stressed your fish with chemicals. UV sterilizers can control free-floating algae that causes green water. But they don't address algae on surfaces, and again, they're treating symptoms rather than balancing your system. The sustainable approach to algae management is surprisingly simple. First, accept that some algae is normal and even beneficial. A light coating of algae on your glass that you wipe down weekly. That's not a problem worth stressing over. Second, address nutrient levels through appropriate feeding, regular water changes, and healthy plant growth. Fast-growing plants are your best algae control because they outcompete algae for nutrients and light. Third, manage your lighting. Most aquariums need only 6 to 8 hours of light daily. More doesn't mean better. Excessive lighting just favors algae over slower-growing plants. Use a timer to ensure consistent light periods. Fourth, stock your tank appropriately. Overfeeding and overstocking lead to excess nutrients, which fuel algae growth. Interestingly, some of the most beautiful aquascapes in competition settings have small amounts of algae that experienced aquascapers deliberately leave in place. They know that a thin biofilm of algae on hardscape can look natural and actually enhances the aesthetic. The biofilm also provides grazing surfaces for shrimp and small fish. The goal isn't sterility, it's balance and naturalism. Here's something that might surprise you. In heavily planted tanks, aquarists sometimes add additional nutrients specifically to ensure plants have enough to grow. This might include adding nitrates and phosphates, the very nutrients that fuel algae. But because the plants are thriving and outcompeting algae for those nutrients, the tanks remain algae-free, despite high nutrient levels. This demonstrates that nutrients alone don't cause algae problems. It's the balance between nutrients, light, and plant growth that matters. For tanks with fish but no plants, some algae is beneficial. It provides surface area for beneficial bacteria. It offers grazing for certain fish species. It indicates your tank is mature and biologically active. It's a completely sterile tank with no algae, no biofilm, and crystal clear water might look beautiful in photos. But it's not necessarily healthier for your fish. The myth that algae must be eliminated has caused aquarists to waste money on unnecessary products, stock their tanks with inappropriate algae-eating fish that outgrow their systems, and stress over cosmetic issues that don't affect their fish's health. A mature, balanced aquarium will naturally have some algae. That's not failure, that's success. When you stop fighting against natural processes and instead work with them, your tanks become lower maintenance, more stable, and honestly, more interesting. So the next time you see some green on your glass, don't panic. Scrape it off if it bothers you aesthetically. But understand that its presence isn't a crisis, it's life. It's nature doing what nature does when conditions are right for growth. Your job isn't to sterilize your tank, it's to maintain balance. And in a balanced system, a little algae is perfectly normal, perfectly healthy, and perfectly fine. Myth 8. All community fish get along together. The term community fish appears throughout the aquarium hobby. Pet stores label certain species as community safe. Care guides recommend them for peaceful tanks. The implication is straightforward. These fish all get along so you can mix and match as you please. Pick the species you find prettiest, add them to your tank, and enjoy your harmonious underwater community. This might be the myth that causes more stress and death in aquariums than any other. The reality is that fish compatibility is complex, context-dependent, and never as simple as labeling something a community fish. Let's start with what community fish actually means. Generally, it refers to species that aren't overtly aggressive and don't have extremely specialized requirements. They tend to be smaller fish, tetras, rasberas, corridoras, some barbs. They're usually adaptable to a range of water parameters. They're not going to immediately attack and kill other fish. But that's where the simplicity ends. Fish compatibility depends on dozens of factors. Size is the most obvious. Many peaceful fish will eat smaller fish if given the opportunity. It's not aggression, it's predation. A thrinch molly isn't being mean when it eats a guppy fry. That's just what fish do. If it fits in their mouth, it's potential food. But size works in reverse too. Large, peaceful fish can be terrorized by small, nippy fish. Angelfish are often labeled as community fish, but put them with tiger barbs and those fins will be in tatters within days. Temperament varies dramatically even within a single species, depending on individual personality, stocking density, and environmental factors. A tiger barb in a group of 8 or 10 of its own kind might be relatively peaceful. A single tiger barb or a pair often become aggressive fin nippers. Bettas are famous for aggression toward other bettas, but individual bettas vary wildly. Some can't even tolerate fish that look vaguely similar to them. Others coexist peacefully with dozens of tank mates. Swimming level matters more than most people realize. Surface-dwelling fish can often coexist with bottom dwellers, even if they wouldn't get along in midwater. This is why you can often keep aggressive fish as long as they occupy different zones of the tank. But stack multiple territorial species in the same zone and you'll have constant conflict. Territory and breeding behavior complicate things further. Many cichlids are sold as community fish when young, but become viciously territorial when breeding. A peaceful pair of rams can turn into terrors, attacking anything that comes near their spawning site. Some fish are fine alone or in pairs, but become aggressive in groups, competing for dominance. Others are peaceful in groups, but aggressive when kept singly or in pairs, lacking the social structure to distribute aggression. Water parameters create hidden compatibility issues. You can technically keep goldfish and bettas in the same temperature range. But goldfish produce massive amounts of waste in water that's too warm for their optimal health, while bettas need warmer temperatures to thrive. African rift lake cichlids need hard alkaline water. South American tetras need soft acidic water. You can force them into the same parameters, but somebody will always be stressed and more susceptible to disease. Diet creates another layer of complexity. Carnivorous fish need protein-rich foods. Herbivores need plant matter. If you're feeding to meet one group's needs, the other group isn't getting proper nutrition. Over time, this leads to health problems, even if there's no outright aggression. Some fish are micropredators, constantly picking at other fish, eating scales or fins. They're not attacking, they're feeding. But the victim still suffers. Activity level is often overlooked. Highly active, fast-swimming fish stress more sedentary species. Boisterous danias racing around the tank can make a shy betta or gourami miserable, even with no actual aggression. The constant motion and competition at feeding time creates stress that manifests as disease susceptibility and shortened lifespan. Then there's the issue of schooling and shoaling requirements. Many community fish need groups of their own kind to feel secure. A single neon tetra in a tank isn't necessarily being attacked, but it's stressed by being alone. That stress suppresses its immune system and makes it vulnerable to disease. The other fish aren't doing anything wrong, but the combination is still incompatible. The reality check that many aquarists need to hear is this: you can't just buy fish you think are pretty and expect them to work out. Every combination needs research and consideration. Even then, individual personalities mean you might need to separate fish that should theoretically be compatible. This isn't failure. It's acknowledging that fish are individuals with their own preferences and behaviors. One of the most problematic practices in the hobby is the one-of-everything approach. New aquarists come home with one platy, one molly, one guppy, one tetra, one cory catfish, and wonder why their tank isn't thriving. None of these fish are being kept in appropriate conditions. The tetra and cory need schools. The live bearers might be fine individually, but would be more confident in groups. The tank lacks natural social structure because you've got random individuals of different species rather than cohesive groups. Here's what experienced aquarists have learned through trial and error. You're better off with fewer species in appropriate groups than many species represented by singles or pairs. A tank with 15 neon tetras and 6 corydoras will be more successful than a tank with one of 15 different species. The fish that school feels secure. Competition is distributed within the group rather than creating conflict between species. Everyone's needs can be met with a single feeding and maintenance routine. The community tank that actually works requires planning. Research every species you're considering, not just for basic care requirements, but for actual compatibility with your other specific fish. Consider adult sizes. Understand temperament variations. Think about swimming levels and territories. Match water parameters, dietary needs, and activity levels. Stock in appropriate groups for schooling species. Be prepared to have a backup plan if individuals don't get along despite being compatible on paper. And here's the hard truth. Some combinations will never work no matter how much you want them to. You can't keep male bettas together. You can't mix large predatory fish with fish small enough to be prey. You can't force fish with opposite water parameter needs into a single tank and expect everyone to thrive. Some fish simply aren't compatible, and no amount of hoping will change that. The label community fish isn't useless, but it's oversimplified to the point of being misleading. It suggests compatibility is guaranteed when it's actually conditional. Think of it more as potentially compatible under the right conditions with appropriate tank mates and proper care. That's more accurate but less marketable, which is probably why the industry sticks with community fish. If you take one thing from this, let it be this: assume incompatibility until proven otherwise. Research combinations thoroughly. Observe your fish closely when you add new tank mates. Be ready to separate fish if problems develop. Some of the most beautiful, successful aquariums are species tanks, a single species kept in ideal conditions, rather than mixed communities. There's no shame in acknowledging that what you want doesn't match what's actually compatible. Fish keeping is about meeting your fish's needs, not forcing your vision onto living creatures. Sometimes that means accepting that the fish you love can't live together. Build your tanks around compatibility rather than trying to force compatibility around the fish you want. Your fish will be healthier, you'll have fewer problems. And the community you build will actually be peaceful instead of superficially calm while chronically stressed. Myth 9. Cycling a new tank takes 20 to 48 hours. This myth kills more fish than almost any other misconception in the hobby. You set up your brand new aquarium, fill it with water, plug in the filter, and let it run for a day or two. The tank looks beautiful. The water is clear. Everything's working. Time to add fish, right? Absolutely not. The pet store employee who told you to wait 48 hours before adding fish either doesn't understand aquarium biology or is more interested in making a sale than ensuring your fish survive. What they've set you up for is new tank syndrome, a series of deadly ammonia and nitrite spikes that kill fish within days or weeks of setup. And when those fish die, many new aquarists assume they did something wrong or that fish keeping is just too difficult. They give up on the hobby entirely, never realizing they were set up for failure from the start. Let's be crystal clear about what happens in those first 48 hours. Essentially, nothing. You've added water to a glass box. You've turned on equipment that moves that water around. The beneficial bacteria that process fish waste don't magically appear because you plugged in a filter. They need to colonize every surface in your tank, and more importantly, they need to multiply to numbers sufficient to handle a byload. This process takes weeks, not hours. The bacterial colonies that process ammonia and nitrite in your aquarium are entirely separate groups of organisms. Nitrosomono species convert ammonia to nitrite. Nitrobacter species convert nitrite to nitrite. Both groups need time to establish. They reproduce relatively slowly compared to many bacteria. A single bacterium divides and becomes two. Those two become four. After enough generations, you have billions, but this doesn't happen overnight. In a typical fishless cycle where you add an ammonia source without fish present, you'll see specific stages. First, ammonia levels rise as you add your ammonia source. Nothing happens for days or even weeks. Then ammonia starts dropping while nitrite rises. The nitrosomonas bacteria have established enough to begin processing ammonia. But now you have a nitrite spike, which is also toxic to fish. More waiting. Eventually, nitrite starts dropping while nitrate rises. The Nitrobacter bacteria have established. The cycle completes when you can add ammonia and it's converted to nitrate within 24 hours with no accumulation of ammonia or nitrite. This process typically takes 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer, especially in cooler water or if starting with very limited bacterial seeding. The timeline isn't arbitrary. It's biological reality based on bacterial generation times and the need to develop substantial colonies. There's no shortcut that reduces it to 48 hours. Why does this myth persist? Several reasons. First, there's the immediate gratification problem. People set up a tank because they want fish. Telling them to wait 6 weeks is a hard sell. Pet stores know that many customers won't return in 6 weeks. They'll buy fish somewhere else. So the incentive is to get fish into that tank as quickly as possible. Consequences for the fish be damned. Second, there's confusion about what letting a tank run actually accomplishes. Running the filter does help distribute any naturally occurring bacteria in your water throughout the tank. It does ensure all your equipment is working properly. These are good things, but they're not the same as establishing a nitrogen cycle. The water being clear and the filter humming away create an illusion that the tank is ready. It's not. Third, some fish do survive the 40-hour myth. If you stock very lightly, 1 or 2 small fish in a large tank, and do frequent water changes during the initial period, you might keep ammonia and nitrite low enough that the fish survive until the cycle eventually completes. This creates survivorship bias. The person whose fish made it tells others it's fine to add fish after 2 days. The people whose fish died often blame something else or leave the hobby quietly. The myth perpetuates. The harm this causes extends beyond individual fish deaths. New aquarists who lose their first fish often become discouraged. They might try again, following the same bad advice, and fail again. Eventually, they conclude that fish keeping is too difficult, or that they lack some innate skill. This is tragedy on top of tragedy. The hobby has lost countless potential long-term enthusiasts because they were never taught proper cycling procedures. Here's what should happen instead. Set up your tank with substrate decorations, filter, and heater. Fill it with dechlorinated water. Turn everything on. Add an ammonia source, either pure ammonia from a bottle or a piece of fish food that will decompose and release ammonia. Test your water every few days to track the cycle's progress. When you see ammonia drop and nitrite rise, you're making progress. When nitrite drops and nitrate rises, you're nearly there. When you can add ammonia to bring levels to 2 parts per million and it processes to 0 ammonia and 0 nitrite within 24 hours, your tank is cycled. Only then should you add fish, and even then, add them gradually. Start with a small number of hardy fish. Wait a week or 2 for bacterial populations to adjust to the increased bioload. Add more fish. Continue gradually stocking over several weeks. This approach gives your biological filtration time to grow in pace with your increasing bioload. Some people use bottled bacteria products to speed the process. Modern formulations from reputable companies can reduce cycling time to 2 to 3 weeks. They don't make it instant, but they help. These products work by adding concentrated colonies of the specific nitrifying bacteria your tank needs. They're not magic, but they're not scams either, assuming you buy legitimate products, not shelf-stable bottles that claim to cycle your tank instantly. The alternative is fish in cycling, where you add a small number of hardy fish to the uncycled tank and carefully monitor ammonia and nitrite levels. Doing daily partial water changes to keep toxins low while bacteria establish. This can work, but requires dedication and carries risk to the fish. It's generally not recommended when fishless cycling is so straightforward and humane. There's also seeding, where you use filter media, substrate, or decorations from an established healthy tank to introduce bacteria to your new tank. This can dramatically speed cycling since you're starting with established colonies rather than single bacteria that need to multiply. Aquarium clubs often have members willing to share cycled media with new hobbyists. This is one of the best ways to start a tank responsibly. What makes the 48-hour myth especially frustrating is how easily it's debunked. Test your water after 2 days. Ammonia will be 0 because you have no fish-producing waste. Nitrite will be 0. Nitrate will be 0. There's no evidence of a working nitrogen cycle because the cycle hasn't established. The tests literally show that the claim is false. Yet the myth persists because most people don't test their water before adding fish. They trust that 48 hours is sufficient because someone told them so. The deaths that result from this myth are often miserable. Fish in cycling exposes fish to days or weeks of burning their gills in ammonia-tainted water. They gasp at the surface. They lose color. They become lethargic. Eventually, they die, often after obvious suffering. This is entirely preventable. Every single death resulting from the 40-hour myth is unnecessary. They're casualties of impatience and misinformation. If there's one thing you remember from this entire documentary, let it be this: A tank is not cycled after 48 hours. It's not cycled after a week. It's cycled when testing confirms that ammonia and nitrite are being processed completely to nitrate within 24 hours. This takes weeks, not days. Any advice suggesting otherwise is wrong and dangerous. Don't let impatience or bad information kill your fish. Wait for the cycle to complete. Test to confirm, then stock gradually. Your fish deserve nothing less. Myth 10. Expensive equipment equals a better tank. The aquarium equipment market has become sophisticated and expensive. Premium filters promise superior biological filtration. High-end LED lighting systems offer precise spectral control. Computer-controlled monitors track and adjust parameters automatically. The message is clear. If you want successful fish keeping, you need to invest in quality equipment. Cheap stuff won't cut it. Your fish deserve the best, and the best costs money. But does it? Is there actually a correlation between equipment cost and aquarium success? Or is this another myth that benefits manufacturers and retailers while draining hobbyists' wallets? The truth is nuanced. Quality equipment can make fish keeping easier and more convenient. Better construction might mean longer-lasting products. More features can provide finer control over conditions. But the fundamental requirements for keeping fish healthy haven't changed, and they don't inherently require expensive solutions. Fish need clean water, appropriate temperature, adequate oxygen, and proper feeding. These needs can be met with basic equipment as effectively as with premium gear. Let's start with filtration, where this myth is most pervasive. High-end canister filters can cost hundreds of dollars. They're beautifully engineered, quiet, and hold large amounts of media. But the biological filtration, the actual processing of ammonia and nitrite that keeps fish alive, happens on surfaces where bacteria colonize. It doesn't matter if those surfaces are in a $300 canister filter or a $20 sponge filter. The bacteria don't care about price tags. In fact, some of the most successful fish breeders and long-term hobbyists use the simplest, cheapest filtration available. Sponge filters powered by air pumps provide excellent biological filtration, are gentle enough for fry and small fish, and cost a fraction of complex systems. They're easy to maintain, virtually indestructible, and provide exactly what fish need: biological processing of waste and gentle water movement. Are they as aesthetically pleasing as an invisible canister filter? No. Do they work as well for keeping fish healthy? Absolutely. The same principle applies to lighting. Premium LED fixtures with adjustable spectrums, sunrise, sunset simulation, and smartphone control can cost hundreds or thousands of dollars. Or planted tanks with demanding species. Some of these features provide genuine benefits. But for fish-only tanks or low-light plants, a basic LED fixture does everything necessary. Your fish don't care if the light simulates a tropical thunderstorm. They care that there's enough light to see their food and establish a day-night cycle. A $30 fixture accomplishes that perfectly. Heaters represent another equipment category where price doesn't correlate with essential function. A heater needs to maintain stable temperature within an appropriate range, whether it costs $20 or $80. If it does that reliably, it's doing its job. The more expensive models might have more precise thermostats, titanium construction, or digital controllers. These features can be convenient and potentially more reliable, but they don't fundamentally improve your fish's health compared to a basic heater that maintains stable temperature. The myth of expensive equipment becomes particularly problematic when it discourages people from entering the hobby. Someone interested in keeping fish sees recommendations for premium equipment with total setup costs running into thousands of dollars and concludes fish keeping is too expensive. Meanwhile, successful aquariums have been maintained for decades with basic equipment costing a fraction of that. The entry barrier is artificially inflated. What actually matters is understanding what equipment does and choosing appropriately. Filtration needs to provide mechanical, biological, and chemical filtration adequate for your bioload. This doesn't require the most expensive filter. It requires a filter sized appropriately for your tank with enough surface area for bacterial colonization. A $50 hang-on back filter can accomplish this as effectively as a $500 canister for many applications. Similarly, test kits don't need to be expensive to be accurate. The basic API Master Test Kit, which costs around $30, provides everything necessary to monitor your water parameters. Professional laboratory testing might give you more precise readings, but for hobby purposes, knowing if your ammonia is 0 versus 0.02 parts per million is academic. Your fish respond to ranges, not decimal places. There is a legitimate quality consideration with certain equipment. Extremely cheap heaters can malfunction and cook your fish. Budget filters might be noisy or break quickly, requiring replacement. Rock-bottom equipment can cost more in the long run through failures and replacements. But there's a huge middle ground between the cheapest junk and the most expensive premium products. Mid-range equipment from established manufacturers offers reliability and functionality without unnecessary features that inflate cost. The computer-controlled aquarium represents the apex of expensive equipment. Systems that automatically monitor and adjust pH, conductivity, temperature, and other parameters can cost thousands of dollars. For specialized applications like breeding sensitive species or maintaining reef aquariums with demanding corals, this level of control might be justified. But for typical community freshwater fish, it's complete overkill. Fish that have evolved to handle seasonal fluctuations in nature don't need parameters maintained to 3 decimal places. What expensive equipment often provides is convenience, not capability. An automatic feeder doesn't improve your fish's nutrition compared to hand feeding, but it makes extended absence easier. A sophisticated lighting controller doesn't grow plants better than a timer and basic fixture, but it provides more options for customization. These conveniences have value, but they're not requirements for successful fish keeping. The myth becomes especially insidious when coupled with brand loyalty and marketing. Certain brands cultivate reputations for premium quality and charge accordingly. Sometimes this reputation is deserved. Other times, you're paying for marketing, packaging, and brand cachet while the actual product differs little from cheaper alternatives. The aquarium industry, like many industries, relies on perception as much as performance. Here's what new aquarists actually need: a tank of appropriate size, a filter that turns over the tank volume several times per hour, a heater if keeping tropical fish, a light source, and basic test kits. This setup can be assembled for well under $200 for a 20-gallon tank. The fish you keep in this basic setup can thrive just as well as fish in a $1,000 high-tech system, assuming proper care and maintenance. The real determinants of aquarium success have nothing to do with equipment cost. Knowledge matters far more than gear. Understanding the nitrogen cycle, choosing compatible species, maintaining consistent parameters, feeding appropriately, and observing your fish to catch problems early. These skills make the difference between thriving fish and struggling fish. You can't buy expertise. It comes from research, experience, and attentiveness. Equipment failures teach this lesson repeatedly. The hobbyist with expensive equipment who doesn't maintain it, doesn't understand water chemistry, and doesn't research their fish will fail. Meanwhile, the hobbyist with basic equipment who does their homework, observes carefully, and responds appropriately to problems will succeed. Equipment quality matters far less than operator knowledge. This isn't to say you should deliberately buy the cheapest equipment available. It's to say that adequate equipment exists across a wide price range, and once you meet your fish's actual needs, spending more doesn't necessarily improve outcomes. A planted tank hobbyist might genuinely benefit from high-output lighting and CO2 injection systems. A breeder might find sophisticated monitoring equipment valuable, but most fish keepers, they need reliable basics, not premium luxuries. The aquarium hobby should be accessible to anyone interested in keeping fish, not just those who can afford top-tier equipment. Some of the most beautiful, successful aquariums have been maintained by people with modest budgets who invest time and attention rather than money. Expensive equipment doesn't compensate for poor husbandry. An excellent husbandry succeeds even with basic equipment. When someone tries to tell you that you need to spend thousands of dollars on equipment to keep fish successfully, understand that they're either trying to sell you something or they've bought into marketing that serves manufacturers' interests, not yours or your fish's. Buy equipment that's appropriately sized, reliable, and fits your budget. Then invest your resources in learning and attention. Your fish will thrive and your wallet will thank you. So where does this leave us? We've examined 10 myths, 10 beliefs that have shaped fish keeping practices for decades, often to the detriment of the fish we claim to care about. Some of these myths are relatively harmless misunderstandings. Others are directly responsible for millions of preventable fish deaths every year. The common thread running through all these myths is this: they persist because they're convenient. It's easier to believe fish grow to fit their tanks than to provide appropriate space. It's more comfortable to think fish don't remember or feel pain than to acknowledge we might be causing suffering. It's faster to add fish after 2 days than to wait weeks for proper cycling. And it's simpler to buy a single community fish of each type than to research compatibility and stock in appropriate groups. But convenience for us translates to suffering for fish. And the hobby deserves better. Fish keeping should be based on understanding animal behavior, respecting biological needs, and making decisions informed by science rather than folklore. When we perpetuate myths, we're not just spreading misinformation, we're normalizing practices that harm living creatures who depend entirely on us for their welfare. Here's what actually matters in fish keeping: space, water quality, appropriate temperature, compatible tank mates, proper nutrition, and stable conditions. Notice what's not on that list: expensive equipment, daily intervention, complex chemistry expertise, or magical products that solve every problem. Successful fish keeping isn't complicated or mysterious. It requires learning, patience, and respect for your fish as living animals with specific needs. The next time someone repeats one of these myths to you or tries to sell you something based on them, you'll know better. You understand that fish don't grow to fit their tanks. They grow to match their genetics. You know their memories span months or years, not seconds. You understand that bettas need real aquariums, not decorative vases. You recognize that water change frequency depends on your specific tank, not arbitrary rules. And you know that fish, like all animals, deserve to be treated as sentient beings capable of suffering. The aquarium hobby is at its best when it prioritizes animal welfare over convenience, science over tradition, and genuine understanding over repeated myths. Every time you question a common practice, research before making decisions. And choose your fish's needs over your own preferences. You're elevating the hobby. Every fish that lives a full, healthy life in appropriate conditions is a success story. And every new aquarist you teach proper practices to creates a ripple effect of better fish keeping. Fish keeping isn't about keeping fish alive. It's about helping them thrive. And that starts with letting go of myths that never served them in the first place. If you found this information valuable, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with anyone who keeps fish or is thinking about starting the hobby. And most importantly, look at your own tanks with fresh eyes. Are you perpetuating any of these myths? What changes could you make to improve your fish's lives? The best time to make those changes was when you set up your tank. The second best time is right now. Thanks for watching, and here's to healthier, happier fish for everyone in this amazing hobby.